My mother-in-law tried to poison me at Sunday dinner, but I switched our glasses at the last second, and what happened next destroyed their perfect family forever. I'm sitting here 3 months later, still shaking as I tell you this story. Because what I discovered that night didn't just save my life. It exposed the darkest secret a family could hide. But before I tell you how I caught Delphine red-handed and what I did about it, let me paint you the picture of how we got here. Because trust me, you need to understand just how twisted this woman really was. My name is Caspian, and I thought I'd married into the perfect family. My wife Serafina came from money. The kind of old money that builds wings on hospitals and gets streets named after them. Her mother, Delphine Whitmore, was Charleston society royalty. The kind of woman who threw charity galas and spoke in that slow, honey-dripped southern accent that made everything sound like a blessing and a threat at the same time. From day one, Delphine made it clear I wasn't good enough for her precious daughter. I grew up in the projects on the other side of town. My dad worked construction. My mom cleaned houses, including houses in Delphine's neighborhood. I put myself through college waiting tables and fixing cars. When I met Serafina at the university library, she was slumming it in the public section because her sorority sisters dared her to check out a book she'd actually read. We fell hard and fast. She loved that I was real, that I didn't kiss her ass because of her last name. I loved that underneath all that polish and privilege, she was kind and funny and saw the world like I did, full of possibilities instead of limitations. But Delphine? She saw me as a gold digger, a mistake, a stain on the family name that needed to be removed. The passive-aggressive comments started immediately. "Oh, Caspian, how interesting that you choose to wear that tie with that shirt." Or my personal favorite, "Serafina, dear, are you sure you wouldn't be more comfortable with someone from your own background?" For 3 years, I took it. I smiled through the insults disguised as concern. I nodded politely when she'd suggest job opportunities, more suited to my skill set. Always something that would take me far away from Charleston and her daughter. I took it because I loved Serafina more than I hated her mother. And because deep down, I thought I could win Delphine over eventually. Show her I was worthy of her daughter's love. God, I was naive. The Sunday dinners were the worst part. Every week, Delphine would host these elaborate family gatherings at her mansion on Rainbow Row. The kind of house that made you whisper automatically when you walked through the front door. Crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of dead ancestors, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Serafina's father, Thaddeus, was a quiet man who'd learned long ago to keep his head down and his mouth shut around his wife. Her brother, Evander, was a carbon copy of his mother, all surface charm and hidden cruelty. And then there was me, the outsider trying to navigate conversations about yacht clubs and trust funds while carving prime rib with silver that probably belonged in a museum. But this particular Sunday was different. I could feel it the moment we walked through the door. Delphine was too friendly, too welcoming. She actually complimented my shirt, a cheap button-down from Target that she would normally dissect with her eyes. She asked about my job at the nonprofit where I helped kids from neighborhoods like the one I grew up in. She even laughed at one of my jokes. Serafina noticed it too. In the kitchen, while we were helping set the table, she grabbed my arm. "What's gotten into Mother?" she whispered. "She's being almost nice to you." I should have trusted that feeling in my gut. The one that said nice wasn't in Delphine's vocabulary when it came to me. Dinner started normally enough. Thaddeus carved the roast while Delphine held court at the head of the table, telling stories about her bridge club drama and the new family that had moved into the Ashford estate. Evander bragged about his latest business deal. Serafina talked about her work at the art gallery. I mostly listened, adding comments when spoken to directly, trying to be the perfect son-in-law I'd never actually be in Delphine's eyes. Then came the wine. Delphine made a big production of it, bringing out a bottle she claimed had been saved for a special occasion. "This is a 1982 Bordeaux," she announced, handling the bottle like it was holy water. "Thaddeus bought it for our 20th anniversary, but we've been waiting for the right moment to open it." She poured glasses for everyone, starting with Thaddeus, then Evander, then Serafina. When she got to me, she paused, that familiar calculating look in her steel-gray eyes. "I hope you can appreciate something this fine, Caspian," she said, filling my glass to the brim. It's probably quite different from what you're used to." There it was, the dig wrapped in false generosity. I forced a smile and nodded my thanks. But something felt wrong. Call it intuition, call it paranoia from years of verbal warfare, but the way she'd hesitated over my glass, the way her fingers had lingered on the stem as she set it down, it sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I watched as she raised her own glass in a toast. "To family," she said, those cold eyes fixed on mine. "And to knowing where you belong." Everyone drank except me. I brought the glass to my lips, tilted it like I was taking a sip, but didn't actually drink. Old habit from college parties where you couldn't trust every drink that got handed to you. Good thing I did. Because as I set my glass down, I caught something that made my blood run cold. Delphine was watching me with the intensity of a hawk watching a mouse. Not the casual observation of a hostess making sure her guests were enjoying themselves. This was focused, expectant, like she was waiting for something specific to happen. That's when I knew. My drink was spiked. My first instinct was panic. Then anger so hot it almost blinded me. This woman, this supposed pillar of society, had just tried to drug me at her own dinner table, in front of her family, in front of her daughter. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think, because I realized something else in that moment of crystal clarity. This was my chance to finally expose Delphine for what she really was. So I started planning. I waited about 10 minutes, making small talk and pretending to sip my wine occasionally. Then I excused myself to use the bathroom. Instead of going upstairs to the main powder room, I ducked into the small half bath off the kitchen, the one the staff used. I dumped about half my wine into the sink and rinsed the glass quickly. Then I filled it back up with regular wine from the bottle in the kitchen, the same vintage but from a different bottle I'd seen earlier. When I came back to the dining room, I had a plan. "Delphine," I said, settling back into my chair, "this wine really is exceptional. Could you tell me more about it? I'd love to learn." Her eyes lit up with what she probably thought was victory. "Of course, dear. It's quite complex. Notes of black cherry, tobacco, a hint of leather." While she talked, I watched and waited. Thaddeus was reaching for the salt. Evander was checking his phone under the table. Serafina was listening to her mother with that patient expression she'd perfected over the years. And Delphine was gesturing with her wine glass, getting more animated as she talked about tannins and terroir and aging processes. That's when I made my move. I reached across the table for the bread basket, deliberately knocking over my water glass. It crashed into Delphine's wine glass, sending both tumbling. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." I jumped up, grabbing napkins, making a big show of cleaning up the mess. "I'm such a klutz." In the chaos, Serafina helping clean up, Evander moving his phone out of the way, Thaddeus getting more napkins from the sideboard, I did what I'd planned. I switched glasses. Not the broken ones, but the backup. While Delphine was distracted, fussing about the tablecloth, I grabbed her fresh glass of wine from the kitchen counter where she'd set it during the cleanup and swapped it with the glass I'd prepared for myself. "Here, let me get you a fresh glass," I said, handing her my doctored wine with a concerned smile. I feel terrible about the mess. She took it without even looking, too busy directing the cleanup operation like she was commanding troops. And then we all sat back down to finish dinner. I watched that glass like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. Delphine sipped her wine, my wine, the one that was supposed to be mine, while continuing her lecture about grape varieties. She didn't notice anything different about the taste. Why would she? She knew exactly what she'd put in there. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I was starting to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing when I noticed Delphine's speech starting to slur slightly. Nothing obvious, just a softening around the edges of her usually precise diction. 25 minutes in, she was swaying slightly in her chair. 30 minutes and she was struggling to keep her eyes open. "Mother?" Serafina leaned forward, concerned. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." "I'm fine, darling," Delphine mumbled, but her words were thick and heavy. "Just tired suddenly. Must be the wine." Thaddeus was watching his wife with growing alarm. "Delphine, maybe you should lie down. You don't look well." "Don't be ridiculous," she tried to snap, but it came out as more of a slurred whisper. "I'm perfectly—" She never finished the sentence. Her eyes rolled back and she slumped forward onto the table, unconscious. The next few minutes were chaos. Serafina screaming for someone to call 911, Evander checking his mother's pulse, Thaddeus pacing and muttering about allergic reactions and heart conditions. And me? I sat there watching it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and growing dread. Because I was about to learn that what Delphine had tried to do to me was so much worse than I'd imagined. The paramedics arrived within minutes, perks of living in the historic district where response times were prioritized. They loaded Delphine onto a stretcher, checking her vitals and asking rapid-fire questions about medications, allergies, what she'd eaten and drunk. At the hospital, we waited in the sterile family room while doctors ran tests. Serafina was crying, clinging to her father's arm. Evander was on his phone, probably calling other family members. And I was sitting there with a secret that was burning a hole in my chest. Dr. Holloway came out 3 hours later, his face grim. "The good news is that Mrs. Whitmore is stable, but we found something concerning in her blood work." He paused, looking at each of us in turn. "She's been drugged, Rohypnol to be specific, a significant dose." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "Rohypnol?" Thaddeus repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "But that's... A date rape drug, yes," Dr. Holloway confirmed. "Someone slipped it into something she consumed tonight. We need to call the police." Serafina's face went white. "Who would do such a thing? Mother doesn't have enemies. She's involved in charity work, the church, the historical society." But I knew who had done it. Delphine herself. The question was, what had she been planning to do to me once I was unconscious and helpless? And that's when I realized this story was far from over. Because, as I sat there in that hospital waiting room, watching my wife cry over the mother who had tried to drug her husband, I made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what Delphine had planned, and then I was going to make sure she paid for it. But first, I had to survive the police investigation that was about to turn my life upside down. Because when Detective Morrison showed up an hour later with his notepad and suspicious eyes, I became the prime suspect in my own attempted poisoning. And the real nightmare was just beginning. Detective Morrison looked like he'd stepped out of a 1970s cop show. Rumpled coat, tired eyes, and the kind of mustache that had seen too many interrogation rooms. He pulled me aside while the family huddled together, grieving and confused. "So, Caspian," he said, flipping open his notepad, "tell me about your relationship with your mother-in-law." I could have told him the truth right then, could have explained how I'd switched the glasses, how Delphine had tried to drug me, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way his eyes had already judged me guilty. Maybe it was the 3 years of being treated like an outsider by this family. Or maybe it was because I wanted to know what Delphine's real plan had been before I destroyed her. "We don't get along," I said simply. "She's never thought I was good enough for her daughter." "Enough to drug her?" "I didn't drug anyone." But I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe me. In his mind, the story was simple. Poor boy marries rich girl. Mother-in-law disapproves. Poor boy tries to eliminate the problem. The fact that I was the only non-family member at dinner made me the obvious suspect. They kept me at the hospital for 4 more hours, asking the same questions over and over. Where did I sit? Who served the wine? Did I have access to the kitchen? Had I ever heard of Rohypnol? I answered everything honestly, except for the part about switching glasses. That secret felt like my only weapon in whatever war was coming. Finally, they let me go home with Serafina. She was quiet during the drive, staring out the window at the dark Charleston streets. "They think you did it," she said as we pulled into our driveway. "I know. Did you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. This was my wife, the woman I'd loved for 3 years, asking if I'd tried to drug her mother. "No," I said, "but I don't think you believe me." She was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, in a voice so small I almost missed it. "I want to. But Mother said something to me last week. About you. About things she'd noticed." My blood went cold. "What kind of things?" "The way you look at her sometimes. Like you hate her. She said she was worried about what you might do if you got desperate enough." I stared at my wife, really looked at her, and realized that Delphine had been poisoning more than just my wine. She'd been poisoning Serafina against me for weeks, maybe months, planting seeds of doubt, watering them with carefully chosen words and manufactured concern. "Serafina," I said carefully, "your mother tried to destroy our marriage from day one. Now she's trying to destroy me. Can't you see that?" But she was already getting out of the car, walking toward our house with her shoulders set in that stubborn line I knew meant the conversation was over. That night, she slept in the guest room. The next morning, I woke up to find Detective Morrison on my doorstep with a search warrant. They went through everything: my computer, my phone, my car, even the medicine cabinet in our bathroom. Looking for Rohypnol, they said, or evidence that I'd purchased it. They didn't find anything, of course, because I hadn't drugged anyone. But watching them tear apart the life I'd built with Serafina, I felt something break inside me. That afternoon, Delphine woke up. I was at work when Serafina called. "She's awake," my wife said, her voice tight with stress. "She wants to see the family, but Caspian, she doesn't want you there." "Of course she doesn't. The police want to talk to her as soon as the doctors clear her. I think you should stay away until this is all sorted out." So I did. I went home to our empty house and sat in my kitchen, drinking beer and trying to figure out how my life had imploded in less than 24 hours. That's when I decided to do some investigating of my own. If Delphine had been planning to drug me, she had to have gotten the Rohypnol somewhere. And if she was smart enough to plan this whole thing, she was smart enough to have a reason beyond just getting rid of me. I started with her computer. Don't ask me how I got into the Whitmore house. Let's just say that 3 years of family dinners had taught me where they hid the spare key, and I knew Delphine would be in the hospital for at least another day. Her home office was exactly what you'd expect from a Southern society matron. All antique furniture and family photos and charity award plaques. But her computer was surprisingly modern, and she'd been careless with her passwords. What I found in her email made my hands shake. There were messages going back 6 months to someone named Dr. Beaumont. Nothing directly incriminating, but enough coded language to paint a picture. References to solving the problem and permanent solutions, and making sure certain obstacles were removed. But it was the web browser history that really opened my eyes. Searches for untraceable poisons. How long does Rohypnol stay in system? Accidental death versus suicide staging. And then, buried in her browsing history from 2 weeks ago, how to make murder look like overdose. Murder. She hadn't been planning to drug me and embarrass me, or even have me arrested. She'd been planning to kill me and make it look like I'd overdosed on the very drug they'd found in her system. I sat back in her expensive leather chair, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. This wasn't just about getting rid of an unwanted son-in-law. This was about cold-blooded murder. But why? What could I possibly have done to make her want me dead? That's when I found the real evidence. Hidden in a folder marked household expenses were documents that had nothing to do with running a house. Bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of, investment records, and a letter from a law firm about something called the Ashworth Trust. I'd heard that name before. Serafina had mentioned it once, some family trust fund that would make her independently wealthy when she turned 30. But according to these documents, there was a catch. The trust could only be inherited if Serafina was married to someone the family trustees approved of. And the trustees were Delphine and Thaddeus. If Serafina divorced me, or if I died, she'd inherit millions. If she stayed married to me against their wishes, she'd get nothing. But there was more. Another document, this one from a private investigator's report dated just last month. They'd been investigating me, not just my background, but my current activities, and they'd found something that made my blood run cold. The report detailed my work at the nonprofit, including the after-school program I ran for at-risk kids. But it also included photos. Photos of me with the kids, Photos that, taken out of context and presented in the right way, could be made to look inappropriate. They were planning to frame me as a predator. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Drug me at dinner, make it look like I'd overdosed accidentally. Then, after my death, discover evidence that I'd been inappropriate with children. My reputation would be destroyed posthumously. Serafina would be free to inherit her trust fund, and Delphine would be the grieving mother-in-law who'd tried to warn everyone about me. I printed everything. Every email, every bank statement, every page of that damning report. Then I put it all in a manila envelope and drove straight to Detective Morrison's office. "I need to show you something," I said, dumping the evidence on his desk. He looked through it all with growing amazement, his earlier suspicion of me melting away as the real picture became clear. "This is," he started, then stopped, shaking his head. "This is premeditated murder. She was planning to kill you and destroy your reputation. Can you arrest her?" "Oh, we're going to do more than that. We're going to build a case that'll put her away for attempted murder and conspiracy. But I need you to do something for me first." "What?" "We need her to confess, and I think I know how to make that happen." The plan was simple, but risky. I would visit Delphine in the hospital, wearing a wire, and get her to admit what she'd tried to do. Morrison would be listening from the hallway, ready to step in if things went wrong. "She thinks she won," he explained. "She thinks you're going down for drugging her. That kind of arrogance makes people careless with their words." So, 2 days later, I walked into Charleston General Hospital for the second time that week. But this time, I wasn't there as a victim. I was there as someone seeking justice. Delphine was awake and alert, sitting up in her hospital bed like a queen holding court. She looked surprised to see me, then pleased in a way that made my skin crawl. "Caspian," she said sweetly, "how brave of you to come. I wasn't sure they'd let you out on bail." "I haven't been arrested." "Oh." Her face fell slightly. "Well, I'm sure that's just a matter of time. Once I tell the police what I remember from that night." "What do you remember, Delphine?" She smiled then, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "I remember you being very interested in my wine, very helpful with the glasses, and I remember feeling strange shortly after you handed me that fresh glass. You're going to lie to the police. I'm going to tell them the truth, that you drugged me because you couldn't stand the thought of losing access to my daughter's money." I forced myself to stay calm, to let her keep talking. The wire Morrison had given me was recording every word. "The truth is," I said, "I know what you were really planning." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The Rohypnol was meant for me, wasn't it? You were going to drug me, then what? Make it look like I overdosed? Maybe stage it as a suicide after planting evidence about my work with kids." For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw the real Delphine underneath. Cold, calculating, murderous. "You can't prove any of that," she said carefully. "Actually, I can. I found your computer files, the emails to Dr. Beaumont, the web searches, the private investigator's report. I know about the trust fund, Delphine. I know you needed me dead so Serafina could inherit." Her face went white, then red with rage. "You broke into my house?" "I know you were planning to kill me and frame me as a child molester. Pretty clever, actually. Get rid of me and make sure no one would ever question why." "You little piece of trash," she hissed. And suddenly the Southern Belle accent was gone, replaced by something ugly and raw. "You think you're so smart? You think you've won?" "I think the police are going to be very interested in what you've been planning." She laughed then, a sound like breaking glass. "The police won't believe a word of it. I'm Delphine Whitmore. My family built half this city. You're nobody, a project rat who got lucky with my daughter." "Maybe, but I switched the glasses, Delphine. You drank your own poison, and now the whole world is going to know exactly what kind of monster you really are." That's when she broke completely. "You should have died," she screamed. "You were supposed to die. Do you have any idea what you've cost this family? What your very existence has done to our reputation? I've spent 3 years watching my daughter throw her life away on gutter trash, and I won't stand for it anymore." "So you decided to murder me." "I decided to solve a problem. You were never supposed to survive that dinner. It should have been quick, clean. An accidental overdose, maybe a suicide note about the guilt of your inappropriate relationships with children. Serafina would have been free, the family would have been protected, and nobody would have mourned trash like you. Except it didn't work. No, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It didn't work. But there are other ways, Caspian. Other opportunities. And next time, I won't make the mistake of trusting you to drink what you're given. Detective Morrison chose that moment to walk through the door. Mrs. Whitmore, he said calmly, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and conspiracy to plant false evidence. The look on her face was worth everything I'd gone through. Pure shock, followed by the dawning realization that she'd just confessed to everything on tape. They led her away in handcuffs, still screaming about family honor and how dare they treat her like a common criminal. The trial was a media sensation. Charleston society couldn't get enough of the story. The wealthy matriarch who'd tried to murder her son-in-law over a trust fund. The evidence was overwhelming, and Delphine's recorded confession sealed her fate. She got 15 years for attempted murder. But the real victory wasn't her conviction. It was what happened to my marriage. Serafina filed for divorce 2 weeks after her mother's arrest. Not because she believed I was guilty, but because she couldn't handle the shame of being associated with the scandal. She moved back in with her father and pretended the whole thing had never happened. Evander tried to have me killed 3 months later, hired some ex-con to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. But Detective Morrison had warned me to watch my back, and I was ready. The would-be assassin is doing 10 years, and Evander is facing conspiracy charges of his own. Thaddeus was the only one who apologized. He came to see me after the sentencing, tears in his eyes, begging my forgiveness for what his family had put me through. I should have stopped her, he said. I knew she hated you, but I never imagined. I never thought she was capable of murder. I forgave him. He was as much a victim of Delphine's poison as I was. As for me, I moved away from Charleston, started fresh in a city where nobody knows the name Whitmore or cares about old Southern families and their dark secrets. I still work with kids, still try to make a difference in neighborhoods like the one I grew up in. And sometimes, when I'm having dinner with friends or colleagues, someone will pour wine, and I'll remember that Sunday night when everything changed. The night I learned that evil doesn't always come with fangs and claws. Sometimes it comes with pearls and a sweet smile and a plan to destroy you so perfect that you almost admire it. Almost. But I survived. And Delphine Whitmore, Charleston society queen, charity hostess, attempted murderer, is spending her golden years in a concrete cell, eating prison food off plastic trays. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, but sometimes you have to switch the glasses and let the poison flow back to where it came from. That's justice, and it tastes better than any wine I've ever had. 3 years later, I got word that Delphine had died in prison. Heart attack, they said. Natural causes. I didn't go to the funeral, but I did send flowers. The card read, "To knowing where you belong." She would have appreciated the irony. If this story inspired you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell.